What I'm not going to do is lie on the internet and say I know how to color comics. But what I can do is share some tips and ideas of how to think about coloring comics that I've picked up on my own personal journey. Remember, guys, this podcast is for when you are working or creating your own comic, your own manga, to have on in the background. It's a conversation about the process of making comics, and hopefully, during the time that I explain whatever the topic of the day is, you've made just a little bit more progress on your own comic. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Panels in Progress. I'm Chris, and on today's episode, we're going to talk about colors, flatting, the details, and everything in between. Now, full disclosure, I'm still figuring out how to color comics. I'm still trying to develop my own style, my own techniques, but I do read a lot of comics. I do enjoy how comics look when they're fully colored, and I'm going to share some insight on maybe how you can approach your own comic coloring journey. Now, for all of our manga creators, they have already left the chat room. They're finished. The inks, the screen tones, they've done their details. Their comics, their manga, they're done. But for those of us who want to continue and have our webtoon or our comic completely colored, this is pretty much one of the final phases of creating your own comic. So why don't we begin with the basics? Flatting. What is flatting? Flatting can be taken one or two ways. You can either basically take your entire page and choose a color for each individual character, background, object, etc. You can either have the flats be representative of the base color for what the character or the background is going to be, or it could be whatever, just as whatever color your mind can create, because it's just going to be a holding point for separating the objects that are eventually going to have a color. Sometimes artists use levels to adjust things the way they want, but usually if a professional colorist is doing work, they will send their flats off to someone else, and the flatter will pick random colors for everything, just so that way you have everything separated. Now, for digital comics, this is a very crucial step because this is your base layer. This is the beginning of the coloring. And having your layers organized, you could just name it flats or what have you. It's also going to be great for easy selection of different items within the page. For the flatting of a comic, I used Clip Studio Paint, obviously, for digital comics, but there's great resources on YouTube, and the top one that I'm probably going to recommend over and over and over again on this episode is Color with Kurt, K. Michael Russell, his YouTube channel. He has a wealth of information on his YouTube channel, and he also has courses on how to color comics. So anything to do with flatting, definitely check out his channel. Great teacher, and he really breaks down how to color comics. The next thing we want to talk about is choosing a palette. This is deciding the contrast, harmony, and tone, and you also want to think about value in this area of coloring. You need to consider the genre that you're working in. If you're creating horror comics like myself, then usually you want to use muted colors, very shadow heavy, desaturated colors usually, and you really want to push and pull your values and your contrast to make things pop or disappear into the background. If you're doing a romance comic, you want to use softer palettes of pinks and purples, blues, gentler tones. Just think about pastels and things like that, softer values. You still want to have a value of separation so that way your characters don't get lost in the background, but you want to lean your color palette to a romantic setting or color, so to say. Action comics, definitely you want to bring in that saturation a little bit. You still want that contrast. You're going to probably skew your colors towards vibrant colors, reds, greens, bright blues, things like that. I mean, think about your typical superhero comic. Usually they use a lot of bright colors, especially the older comics back in the day. I'm talking about the Golden Age and Silver Age of Superman, Wonder Woman. There's a very specific reason why they use those bright blues, bright reds, a little bit of gold to make those characters pop and stand out the way they do. Some example comics to check out, to reference, you have Saga. Fiona Staples uses color vibrantly, and there's very subtle mood shifts with her coloring. Something is Killing the Children has a atmospheric type of coloring, darker colors, eerie, intense, and a lot of monotone color palettes. Lots of reds, dark blues. There's a vibe that's attached with Something is Killing the Children. Mantras has ornate and lush colors. Think about all the greens and the natural colors of brown. It's very modest in the way that it's colored, but it's to great effect. And again, some recommendations for studying colors. Color with Kurt, Mark Brunette, and Tyler Edlin. Of course, Cynics has some great coloring videos. I will try my best. I don't know if I have the ability to link videos in my own description box, but if I do, then I will make sure to link all these resources and all these names if you're not familiar with them. But your best bet is always going to be, especially when you're trying to learn your own style for coloring, pick up a comic that you're reading that you love and really take a closer look at it. See how it's being colored. See how they separate the main characters from the background characters. See how they bring the backgrounds to life. That's always going to be your best way. If you see a style of coloring that you like in a book, use that as inspiration to kind of guide the way you want to color your own. I actually intend, after I finish my current comic, I actually intend to pull some of the comics that wow me or impress me with their coloring styles and trying to see if I can take out a couple panels and just recreate it myself and understand how the colorist is using color to enhance the mood of a scene or to enhance just the visuals of whatever is being portrayed. It's just a great way to study coloring for comics. And with that, color can also represent mood and storytelling in a story. You want to ask yourself, what is the emotional tone of this scene? There's warm versus cool colors, which could be tension for warm colors or comfort for cool colors. Desaturated colors could mean that it's a flashback or something that happened in the past, or maybe it's representing depression or sadness in that moment. A highly saturated scene could be excitement, could be action, could be chaos, just depending on how it looks. I'm probably going to use the example of Something is Killing the Children again. Heavy use of shadows, but the colors are always darker. Even in the bright of day scenes, everything seems to be more muted because there is an atmosphere when those monsters show up that the artist, that the colorist is trying to portray. So like I said, look at your favorite comics and instead of reading it to just enjoy, kind of read it, review it, and study it. Take time to linger on the panels and see what's working in that panel. What's working on that page, because you can't just think about how you color one panel. You have to also think about how the colors work for an entire page. And even if you're doing a page to page book, like a normal format comic, how does the spread of colors work? I can't think of any comics aside from the ones that I keep naming off the top of my head, but you can also look at movies. Animated movies specifically do this a lot, and the best example is probably Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse, the two Spider-Man movies. The way they used color to tell that story, both stories, is absolutely a game changer in how you could look at stories. The way they're using not only colors but color styles, because you can color your comic multiple ways. Obviously, there's cell shading, there's the airbrush style, there's the painterly style, which is kind of airbrushing mixed, and there's cut and grad, which is kind of like cell shading, but it takes it a little bit further. There's so many techniques that you can learn and use just to color your comic, and depending on your inking style, the things that we talked about in the last episode, could also depend on what would be best for your coloring style. When we talk about coloring as far as emotional cues, remember that colors can make people feel things. There's a psychology to colors. Blues and grays, it could mean sadness, it could mean isolation, it could mean depression, it could mean uncertainty, depending on the level of saturation. Obviously, if you're using a very high energy blue, that could be happy, that could be beautiful days, that could be anything, on the positive side. But if you're using a desaturated blue, a misty blue, it could skew the other way. Warm oranges and reds could be intensity and anger. You may or may not have noticed, but some comics, depending on the action or what's happening in the scene, they'll do a red panel, which is a color pop that basically grabs your attention. I've done it a couple times on my webtoon, as well as my recent comic that I'm working on, where the character is feeling so much anger in that moment that everything is red. It's like the character sees red, so the reader is going to interpret that anger a little bit better because of all the extra red that's used in the panel. Muted palettes, the one example I showed on my panel deep dive recently, the Deep Dark, used muted palettes where whenever the character was having a flashback, all the colors were softer to reminisce of the memory in the past. You can also use color shifting in your story. I used the examples of Batman Hush, where everything was colored normally, and then those memory flashbacks had a watercolor type feel, a monotone wash, very soft, very delicate, because it was a memory, and I thought it was used to great effect. Check out that video if you haven't seen it on the main YouTube channel, Panel Deep Dive. It's called Batman Hush and Batman Black Mirror. I could go on and on about how many different ways you can use color to your advantage. You could use color to tell the story, to show different scenes within the same universe, different worlds, different factions of groups of people. Maybe certain families, they're all in one type of color palette, and the other families, because they're different, they're all in a different type of color palette. There's so many diverse ways to use color that I think that might be why I struggle with color, because I know that there's so much you can do with it. I know that there's so much that can enhance your story if you do the colors right. I can say that there's definitely been comics that I've read where the color didn't really take away from the story, but it also didn't add to the story. It was just kind of run of the mill. There's a psychology to color and the theory of color, which I'm not going to get into the theory of the different palette types because there are so many videos about the different types of palette types you can use. Even in the different YouTube channels I'm going to share with you, they will share how to look at the color wheel and things like that. This is more about how you can approach color. And now that I spoke about the psychology of color, let's talk about the technique of color. I set my panels up, or I set my pages up in layers because I work digitally. I have a flat layer, a shadow layer, a light layer or highlight layer, and I use clipping masks to organize those. And I color the characters separate from the backgrounds. So I have multiple layers for each element in one panel. And this may or may not be the best way to color. However, it just seems to work for me. I usually pick a color palette, or at least a couple colors that I want to incorporate into the scene. So for Doppel, I knew the overall color that I wanted for each room. So, and I knew that I wanted the house to be blue, but I knew I wanted the basement to be green, the kitchen to be yellow, and I tried to incorporate those colors for those specific areas. Now, what I'm still learning is how to think about the lighting of how light affects those colors in those areas. And to be honest, I did like 56 pages of this comic, and it really wasn't until the last 4 pages that I started to really get a feel for what I was doing. And hopefully, by the time you guys see this, my comic Doppel is on Global Comics, and you guys can check it out. I'll have to make sure the link to that is in the description, if I'm able to, of course. But yeah, let me know, did my idea kind of work? Did the colors take away, or did they enhance? I'm curious to find out, because like I said, between inking and coloring, these are the 2 things that I want to improve the most upon my next comic. So hopefully you guys could take something away in all of that discussion. Like I said, we're on a journey together. Hopefully you use this time to work on your own comic. And why don't you guys let me know, how's your comic coming? Are you in the coloring phase? Are you just thinking about colors? Or did you quit colors because they just not your thing, because you don't have the skill to do it? And maybe another idea, if you have the time or money. I mean, I know that I'm trying to make comics all on my own, and I basically do everything from start to finish. But maybe one day, if I get like a book deal or publishing or something like that, if my coloring skills still aren't where I want them to be, I wouldn't be opposed to hiring a colorist to take care of the heavy lifting, because at the end of the day, we all just want our stories to come out looking the best way they possibly can at the skill level that we have at that time. So that's pretty much the episode. If you're already at this point, you know that this is the final stretch. After colors, it's going to be going back over with not so fine a tooth comb, but trying to get in those last little details, things that you might have overlooked on the first pass through. You're cleaning it up, you're getting it ready for either print, or you're getting it ready to post on social media or share it with your friends and family or your audience if you've already built a successful audience wherever you post your comic. Then this is it. Like, congratulations, you guys, you made something, and now the next step is to share it. So stick around for the next episode of Panels in Progress, where we're going to talk about what's the best place to share your comic. There's so many options out there. There's so many different ways of getting eyes on your work, but what's the best way? If you have any suggestions or things I might not have heard about, let me know in the comment section. I'll be more than happy to check them out, because I am trying to answer that question for myself. Because if we're making comics, obviously we want people to read them, right? Right. So hope you guys enjoyed the conversation and made a little bit more progress on your comic. See you next time.